The Galactic Council had convened on the luminous orb of Aurelia, a planet suspended in the heart of a Helios cluster, a system whose suns burned like liquid gold across the council chambers, casting prismatic light over the representatives of hundreds of civilizations, each one a species steeped in centuries of interstellar dominance, their technology stretching beyond the comprehension of most humans who still relied on relatively primitive starship engines and chemical propulsion systems. The council's chambers were vast, spiraling upward in a domed structure of crystalline alloys that hummed with energy and housed every conceivable form of life, from the crystalline Lamari who communicated in harmonic vibrations to the reptilian Drask who measured truth in the subtle variations of thermal radiation. And yet, amidst all the grandeur and alien sophistication, there was one topic that united the assembly in a rare moment of consensus, one that filled the atmosphere with a mixture of condescension and irritation. Humanity, a species recently admitted into interstellar affairs after decades of cautious observation, a species considered marginal at best, amusing at worst, and inconsequential at worst, had suddenly become the subject of heated debate, and many delegates scoffed at the very notion that the humans could possibly contribute anything of substance to galactic politics or strategy, dismissing their technological achievements as primitive echoes of what true spacefaring civilizations had long mastered. And yet reports kept arriving from the edges of human space, fragmentary intelligence about spacecraft that move with unexpected speed, about communication networks that bypass conventional quantum relay grids, about logistical feats that allowed humans to colonize systems in months rather than centuries. And the more the council discussed, the more the skepticism turned into thinly veiled annoyance, as though the very existence of humanity in the interstellar arena was an affront to the careful hierarchy of galactic civilization, and as the Lamari ambassador emitted a low hum translating roughly to disbelief, the Drask representative hissed, their thermal sensors flickering in agitation, noting that human military maneuvers defied every model the Council's analysts had projected, that they could not reconcile the simplicity of human designs with the apparent efficiency and effectiveness those designs exhibited in real-world encounters. And whispers spread across the chambers, subtle but sharp, questioning how a species so young, so untested, so apparently naive, could achieve results that older, more experienced civilizations had failed to replicate for centuries. And within this swirl of doubt, human observers on the council platform, invisible save for a brief flicker of holographic projection, remained calm, their faces betraying none of the tension, their minds racing to calculate possibilities, anticipating the Council's moves while knowing that the Council had already begun underestimating them, a mistake that would soon prove catastrophic. For even as they debated, fleets of human vessels were mobilizing in sectors previously ignored, outfitted with adaptive shielding, stealth technology, and AI-assisted command systems that learned and countered the strategies of far superior alien fleets in real time. The ships themselves unremarkable in appearance but lethal in function, moving silently through the void, their engines tuned to frequencies that rendered them nearly invisible to conventional scanning, while on Aurelia, the Council representatives continued to argue over petty details, debating the human propensity for irrationality, their audacity in asserting claims to resources and territories that had long been considered beyond their reach, mocking human political systems as chaotic, their military as rudimentary, their scientific achievements as clever but ultimately inconsequential. And yet every report that arrived contradicted their assumptions. From the sudden disappearance of a Drask mining convoy in a sector humans were supposedly too weak to reach, to the unexpected survival and counterattack of human colonies against the combined forces of the KLYDH, a race of silicon-based life forms that prided themselves on indestructible defense mechanisms, and the Aurelian fleet, whose plasma cannons had annihilated entire moons before, now rendered ineffective against human tactical ingenuity. The Council's projections shattered by a combination of improvisation, rapid adaptation, and a level of strategic flexibility that no algorithm could predict, and the debates grew more heated, the Lamari emitting higher frequency vibrations that translated to exasperation, while the Drask's thermal fluctuations intensified, each representative struggling to reconcile centuries of galactic knowledge with the unanticipated rise of humanity, and all the while in orbit above a remote human colony on the edge of the Draxian expanse. Admiral Lucas Hayden stood on the bridge of the Starship Resolute, his hands resting lightly on the console, his gaze sweeping over the holographic display of galactic territories, star systems highlighted in vibrant blue to mark human influence, the crew moving with calm precision as they monitored energy signatures, hyperspace corridors, and alien fleet movements, calculating trajectories and probabilities, while engineers below deck made last-minute adjustments to weapon calibrations and shielding harmonics, and scientists reviewed experimental propulsion vectors, confident that when the time came, humanity would act with decisive force. And back on Virilia, the Council had yet to realize that the humans were not simply another member species, but a variable they could not control, an unpredictable force operating under principles of ingenuity, resilience, and audacity that transcended all conventional wisdom. And as discussion stretched into Virilian Night, delegates continued to underestimate humans, comparing them to a child playing with artifacts too complex to understand, unaware that the child had already deciphered the functions, improved them, and was poised to demonstrate a mastery that would leave the entire council reeling. And in these chambers, the seeds of hubris were sown, as arguments over the human supposed limitations obscured the truth that every misjudgment, every sneer, every dismissive comment only accelerated the human advantage. For humans thrived in the space between expectation and reality, exploiting gaps in alien assumptions, leveraging adaptability where rigidity ruled, and preparing a sequence of moves so calculated that when revealed, the galaxy would see that every council projection, every prediction of human inadequacy, had been spectacularly wrong. And the first signals of that revelation were already echoing across the void, from reconnaissance satellites observing alien fleet positions to intercepted communications between high command officers who marveled at the unexpected precision and timing of human maneuvers, noting that humans acted with a coordination and creativity that defied simulation, their logistics synchronized across multiple star systems, their energy management flawless, their response times faster than even the most advanced AI could predict. And as the council debated endlessly, the humans were quietly reshaping the galactic chessboard, placing pieces where no one expected, building alliances in secret, and preparing a demonstration of ingenuity and tactical brilliance that would force the council to confront a simple but terrifying fact. Humanity was no longer a species to be dismissed, no longer a civilization to be politely tolerated, but a force capable of rewriting the rules of engagement in the galaxy. And as Admiral Hayden issued orders for first coordinated operation against an Aurelian mining cluster that had been siphoning resources from human-claimed systems, the crew executed flawlessly, the fleet moving as one to the blackness, weapons calibrated, shield harmonized, and navigation synchronized a fractions of a second, the operation a prelude to the larger maneuvers designed not to destroy, but to demonstrate control, efficiency, and ingenuity. And when reports reached the council of the sudden disappearance of Aurelian mining stations, not through brute force, but through precision manipulation of sabotaged energy, conduits, rerouted resource flows, and intercepted communications, the council members could only gape in disbelief, their previous assumptions shattered, and as the Drask emitted a series of sharp thermal bursts indicating anger and confusion, and the Luminary's harmonic vibrations rose to near alarm levels, all delegates were forced to acknowledge a reality they had long denied. The humans were cleverer, faster, more adaptable than any had imagined, and the more they tried to analyze, the less predictable humans became, revealing an uncomfortable truth that echoed across the chambers and through every corridor of Virilia, that the age-old confidence of the Galactic Council had met its first true challenge in the form of a species that did not adhere to tradition, that learned from every failure, that thrived under pressure, that took risks calculated with precision, and that would soon demonstrate, through a combination of intellect, strategy, and unyielding determination, that the galaxy had misjudged human ingenuity at its own peril. And as the council sat in stunned silence, awaiting the next report, none could see the full scope of what was unfolding. How human fleets were simultaneously testing, mapping, and infiltrating. How human scientists were decoding alien technology in real time. How human diplomats were sowing discord among the more rigid species. And how every step humans took reinforced the idea that underestimation was humanity's greatest ally. Because each miscalculation by the council accelerated the human advantage. setting the stage for a confrontation that would leave no doubt in any mind that the species they had dismissed as minor, primitive, or insignificant was in truth a galactic powerhouse whose ingenuity, adaptability, and unrelenting drive would change the balance of power forever and in the dark reaches beyond council eyes. Humanity's rise was unstoppable, meticulous, and perfectly timed, a demonstration of how the underestimated could overwhelm the mighty, and how the very act of dismissing a species as minor could itself become the greatest strategic blunder the galaxy had ever witnessed. While on Virilia, the Council remained unaware that the humans were already several moves ahead, anticipating every discussion, every vote, every alliance, and every projection, calculating outcomes, predicting errors, exploiting weaknesses, and preparing to reveal a level of strategic brilliance that would leave the Council and all alien civilizations in awe, forcing them to confront a simple, terrifying truth that humans had known all along. Ingenuity was their greatest weapon, and had been underestimated by every single member of the Galactic Council. As the humans expanded their operations across the sectors previously considered insignificant by the Galactic Council, subtle yet transformative shifts began to ripple through the galaxy. Human engineers on the outer colonies experimenting with propulsion technologies that bent conventional physics, allowing starships to traverse distances previously thought impossible without the massive resource investments that older civilizations required, while human scientists developed modular AI, systems capable of real-time battlefield assessment and adaptive strategy formulation, which could analyze alien tactics mid-engagement and adjust human maneuvers instantaneously, leading to victories over fleets that had once seemed invincible. And these incremental successes, initially dismissed by the Council as isolated incidents, began to accumulate into a pattern too consistent to ignore, as reports detailed the unexpected resilience of human colonies against sustained bombardment, the precision of resource reallocation under siege conditions, and the uncanny ability of human logistics to maintain supply lines across hundreds of light years, ensuring that every unit, every crew, every ship had what it needed, exactly when it was needed. And as the Council convened again in the crystalline chambers of Aurelia, debates grew frantic, some delegates calling for immediate sanctions, others advocating preemptive strikes. Yet no one could agree on an effective course of action, because the humans were simultaneously learning, adapting, and exploiting every hesitation and misjudgment. Their decision-making process agile and decentralized, their command structure robust but flexible, and the more the Council tried to impose traditional hierarchies and predictability, the more the humans circumvented them, turning every assumption into an opportunity. And while Admiral Lucas Hayden orchestrated simultaneous operations in 3 different sectors, coordinating the movement of squadrons with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony, human scientists monitored alien energy grids, subtly redirecting power flows to create temporary blind spots, while engineers fine-tuned defensive matrices, so that human ships became effectively invisible to scans for crucial periods, allowing them to intercept communications and sabotage critical nodes. And in the Council chambers, the Lamari ambassador's harmonic emissions rose to near alarm levels, signaling disbelief, while the Drask representative's thermal pattern spiked in anger and frustration, and the human delegation, projecting only calm composure, recognized that their adversary's underestimation was itself a tactical advantage, a blind spot to be exploited. And as the Aurelian fleet scrambled to respond to human incursions in sectors they had considered secure, their coordination faltered under the unpredictable human strategies, while reconnaissance drones intercepted their formation orders and subtly manipulated them, causing delays and misalignments. And in the meantime, human colonists worked in synchronized efficiency, their terraforming operations expanding habitable zones, creating defensive positions disguised as resource facilities, and stockpiling materials in hidden vaults, all under the guise of ordinary colony development. And as these operations multiplied across the galaxy, Council delegates began to whisper among themselves, acknowledging that humans operated on a level they could neither predict nor counter effectively, and these whispers soon escalated into heated arguments, accusations of incompetence, and urgent calls for decisive action. Yet every proposed intervention failed to account for the human's capacity for rapid adaptation, the Council projections continually falling short of reality. And as the Council's frustration mounted, human strategists observed and calculated, turning the very inaction and confusion of the Council into a strategic asset. Because in every delay, in every misjudgment, humanity gained more ground, refined more techniques, and strengthened their networks of information and influence. And on the frontier worlds, human fleets engaged in mock confrontations, feigning weakness to lure alien commanders into traps that exploited predictable behavior, demonstrating that humans not only anticipated alien strategies, but also manipulated them, turning arrogance into vulnerability. And the results were quietly devastating. Entire fleets diverted, supply chains disrupted, morale plummeting. Yet in the council chambers, no one fully comprehended the scale of the unfolding operations, believing instead that isolated incidents could be managed through conventional means, unaware that the humans had already embedded redundancies, fail-safes, and adaptive responses at every level, creating an operational depth that rendered traditional countermeasures ineffective. And as the humans extended their influence into previously unmonitored sectors, the first signs of systemic disruption appeared in alien communications and logistics networks. Critical nodes overloaded, encryption protocols bypassed, and alien intelligence agencies struggling to reconcile the anomalous human efficiency with their established models, all while human engineers continue to innovate, developing new energy harmonics that allowed faster-than-expected recharge of weapon systems, advanced cloaking techniques that rendered even the most sophisticated scanners ineffective, and propulsion modifications that allowed vessels to maneuver in ways that defied alien expectations. And yet the Council continued to debate, failing to recognize that their delay only amplified the human advantage, their hubris blinding them to the reality that a species underestimated was a species empowered, a principle humans had long understood and were exploiting perfection. And while humans built tactical and technological superiority, they also engaged in strategic psychological operations, subtly broadcasting misinformation to alien fleets, creating false signals of weakness in some sectors while massing forces in others, drawing alien commanders into traps and misaligning entire fleets. And the aliens, conditioned to rigid protocols and predictable hierarchies, struggled to adapt. Their every attempt met with human ingenuity that turned their strengths into liabilities. And across multiple theaters of operation, the cumulative effect of human action became undeniable. Alien supply lines fractured, command chains faltered, fleet cohesion dissolved, and colony security weakened. And yet in the council chambers, the realization of systemic human superiority had not fully crystallized, with delegates clinging to the notion that anomalies could be corrected with conventional force, unable to see the broader pattern. While back on human vessels, Admiral Hayden oversaw simultaneous engagements, analyzing alien maneuvers, deploying countermeasures with split-second precision, and coordinating electronic warfare, logistics, and intelligence operations in perfect synchronization, creating a scenario where humans acted decisively yet unpredictably, and in each confrontation, alien forces were forced into reactive stances, scrambling to adapt to tactics they could not anticipate, losing initiative, momentum, and control, and as the humans advanced, establishing covert listening posts, forward repair stations, and intelligence networks in sectors previously considered irrelevant. They created an invisible infrastructure, allowing operational reach far beyond their apparent capabilities, and alien analysts continue to underestimate, assuming humans were limited by conventional resource constraints, unaware that humans had developed autonomous systems capable of self-repair, adaptive resource allocation, and real-time strategic analysis, giving them the capacity to conduct operations of staggering complexity, with a fraction of the manpower or energy expenditure the Council predicted necessary. And as more reports of human success reached Virilia, the Council members' confidence eroded. Debates grew frantic, and factions began blaming each other for misjudgment. Yet every attempt to unify and impose control only played into human strategy, because humanity thrived on flexibility, creativity, and decentralized decision-making, turning every alien action into an opportunity, exploiting assumptions, and reshaping operational landscapes in real time. And on the human side, engineers continued refining propulsion vectors, weapons harmonics, and cloaking algorithms. Scientists decoded alien communication protocols, and diplomats subtly influenced minor alien powers to provide misinformation or temporary cooperation, creating a cascading advantage that the Council could not counter. And as these operations expanded, entire regions of the galaxy were subtly dominated without a single open battle, through precise control of information, supply, and movement. And while the Council debated endlessly, human ships had already established positions behind enemy lines, prepared to strike with calculated precision at the exact moment required. Their advantage multiplied by the aliens' underestimation, and as Admiral Hayden received the latest tactical reports, noting the efficiency of supply lines, the precision of fleet maneuvers, and the accuracy of predictive AI modeling, he understood that the Council's greatest mistake was their own arrogance, for by dismissing humans, they had unwittingly granted them operational freedom to experiment, innovate, and consolidate power, while alien fleets remained confined by expectation and protocol. And as this realization began to dawn on some of the Council delegates, it was already too late. The humans operating several steps ahead, poised to demonstrate that the very act of underestimation could be exploited into a decisive advantage. And in remote star systems, human colonists executed synchronized operations, repairing and upgrading infrastructure, conducting intelligence sweeps, and preparing forward positions for the next phase of strategic expansion, all orchestrated by a command system that blended human judgment, AI computation, and decentralized initiative, creating a dynamic capability that rendered conventional alien methods ineffective. And as Council members struggled to understand reports of simultaneous human successes across disparate regions, panic began to ripple through their ranks. Yet humans maintained composure, exploiting confusion as a force multiplier. And in the background, scientists continued refining technologies that would soon render alien countermeasures obsolete, ensuring that every engagement would favor human initiative. And while Council debates persisted, humans quietly reshaped alliances, sowed discord, and positioned themselves to strike at the precise moment when the galaxy would finally recognize that every previous assumption about humanity's capabilities had been catastrophically wrong. And as the sun rose over Virelia, casting brilliant light across the Council chambers, the humans prepared the next phase of operations, their ingenuity, coordination, and foresight guaranteeing that the coming weeks would cement their dominance, forcing the Council and all alien civilizations to confront the undeniable truth. Human ingenuity had been misjudged, their potential underestimated, and now the consequences of that misjudgment were unfolded with inexorable precision, reshaping the political, military, and technological balance of the galaxy forever. The realization that humanity was not merely adapting, but actively outpacing ancient civilizations began to spread like a quiet contagion through strategic command centers of the major alien powers. And yet the Galactic Council, bound by tradition and layered bureaucracy, moved with agonizing slowness, its representatives still clinging to models built on the assumption that progress followed predictable curves and that younger species could only advance by imitation rather than innovation. And this fundamental misunderstanding allowed human operations to deepen and widen, as task groups led by officers like Captain Daniel Mercer and Commander Laura Bennett executed long-range reconnaissance and influenced missions that mapped not only physical space, but the psychological patterns of their adversaries, identify where pride overruled caution, where doctrine replaced flexible thought, and where reliance on automated strategic matrices had dulled the instincts of commanders who had not faced true uncertainty in centuries. And in these gaps humans inserted themselves with precision, disrupting supply convoys not through overwhelming firepower, but through timing, striking when protection was weakest and retreating before retaliation could be organized, leaving behind confusion, and the sense that the battlefield itself had become unreliable, while at the same time human scientists under Dr. Aaron Whitaker refined signal-scrambling technologies that allowed entire squadrons to vanish from standard sensor arrays, not by brute cloaking but by overwhelming alien detection systems with subtly altered background radiation patterns, making human vessels indistinguishable from cosmic noise. And this technique, once deployed, rendered vast regions of space effectively transparent to human movement, while remaining opaque to alien surveillance. And as these methods were tested and perfected, human command integrated them into layered strategies that combined misdirection, rapid concentration of force, and sudden dispersal, creating operational tempos that no Council fleet doctrine could match. And when alien patrols finally encountered human formations and strength, they found themselves facing opponents who did not fight to hold territory, but control the flow of information and decision-making, severing communication links, isolating command elements and forcing local commanders to act without guidance, something their rigid hierarchies were ill-prepared for. And each such engagement, even when small in scale, generated data that human AI systems absorb and analyze, refining predictive models that grew more accurate with every confrontation, allowing human fleets to anticipate not only where alien ships would be, but how their commanders would think, hesitate, and react. And this growing predictive edge turned the galaxy into a board on which humanity could see several moves ahead, while the Council remained focused on the current turn. And within the Council chambers, debates grew sharper, some representatives demanding immediate, overwhelming force, others urging caution and negotiation, but all still framing humanity as a problem to be managed rather than appear to be respected. And this semantic distinction shaped every decision, leading to half-measures and delayed responses that humans exploited without mercy. And as weeks turned into months, entire border regions effectively slipped from Council oversight, not through open conquest, but through the quiet dominance of human logistics and information control, with trade routes subtly rerouted, communication relays compromised, and local governments offered security guarantees in exchange for access and cooperation, creating a web of influence that expanded human reach far beyond what their visible fleet numbers suggested. And within this web, human ingenuity manifested not only in technology and tactics, but in the integration of civilian and military efforts, with engineers, scientists, economists, and planners working in concert, blurring the line between wartime and peacetime activity, so that every research facility, every transport hub, every colony ship became a potential node in a vast strategic network. And this whole-of-society approach, alien to most Council species who separated civilian and military spheres rigidly, gave humans a resilience and adaptability that no single strike could cripple. And when alien analysts finally began to piece together the scope of this integration, they realized that even if a major human fleet were destroyed, the knowledge, production capacity, and organizational methods would remain, ready to generate replacements and improvements at a pace that outstripped traditional recovery cycles. And this realization sowed unease among the more perceptive Council members, who began to question long-held assumptions about technological maturity and strategic stability. Yet institutional inertia prevented swift change. And so the Council continued to react rather than anticipate, while humanity continued to shape the environment in which those reactions would occur. And in a remote system rich in exotic matter, a human research task force under Dr. Helen Carter achieved a breakthrough in energy modulation that allowed for compact, high-output reactors with unprecedented efficiency, immediately integrating the technology into both civilian infrastructure and military platforms, further reducing the logistical footprint of human fleets and increasing their operational endurance. And this advance, like so many others, was reported to the Council in technical language that failed to convey its strategic implications, leading many delegates to dismiss it as an incremental improvement rather than a shift in the balance of power. And thus, once again, the galaxy underestimated the compounding effect of human innovation, each small step building on the last, accelerating progress in a way that linear models could not capture. And as the gap between perception and reality widened, the stage was set for a confrontation in which the Council would finally be forced to confront the full consequence of having misjudged not only human technology, but the human capacity to learn, adapt, and outthink civilizations that had grown comfortable in their assumed superiority. By the time the first emergency conclave was called within the inner sanctum of the Galactic Council, the realization that humanity was no longer merely reacting, but actively shaping the strategic environment had begun to unsettle even the most arrogant of the elder species, though pride still prevented them from admitting the full scale of their error. And as holographic star maps rotated above the central dais, showing entire sectors where human activity had quietly eclipsed Council influence, analysts struggled to explain how a civilization so young had achieved such operational coherence, such predictive accuracy, and such technological leapfrogging in so short a span. And yet the data was undeniable. Convoy losses rising in regions where human patrols had never officially been detected, communication delays spreading through networks that had been considered unbreakable, and minor client species quietly shifting trade and security agreements toward Earth and its colonies, not out of fear but out of calculated respect for human reliability and problem-solving ability. And within human command, this shift was fully understood, with Admiral Hayden and a strategic council recognizing that perception was as decisive as firepower, and that the image of humanity as underestimated underdog was now a weapon to be wielded as carefully as any fleet, allowing alien commanders to continue making assumptions that no longer match reality. And so human operations intensified in subtlety rather than scale, employing deniable assets, autonomous reconnaissance swarms, and rapid response task groups that could achieve localized dominance, and vanish before formal attribution could be established, all while feeding carefully curated intelligence back into alien networks to reinforce outdated models of human capability. And this informational asymmetry became a cornerstone of human strategy, creating a fog of uncertainty in which council planners could no longer trust their own projections, while human AI systems, continuously updated with live data from across multiple theaters, refined their simulations until they could anticipate not only likely actions but emotional and political pressures shaping alien decisions. And as these tools matured, they revealed a critical vulnerability in council governance, the tendency to seek consensus before action, a process that granted stability in peacetime, but proved fatally slow in a rapidly evolving strategic landscape, and humans exploited this delay with precision, launching parallel initiatives that forced the council to divide its attention, respond piecemeal, and commit resources without a unified plan. And on the frontier worlds, this translated into a series of bloodless but decisive victories, as human negotiators backed by discrete military presence offer protection, technological assistance, and fair trade terms to systems long neglected by the council, winning loyalty and access without a single shot fired. And each such agreement further extended human logistical reach, creating forward hubs for resupply, repair, and intelligence that allowed fleets to operate deep within regions previously considered beyond their sustainable range. And when isolated clashes did occur, they followed a now familiar pattern, alien forces arriving in strength only to find their targeting systems degraded, their formations disrupted by electronic warfare, and their command links severed at critical moments. While human units maneuver with fluid coordination, concentrating force at decisive points and withdrawing before prolonged engagement could allow the enemy to adapt, and these encounters, though limited in scale, carried profound psychological impact, for they demonstrated that human units could dictate the terms of contact, choose when and where to fight, and disengage at will, a level of operational control that many older species had not faced since their own formative wars. And within the council chambers, this growing unease manifested as increasingly heated debates, with some delegates accusing others of downplaying the threat, while hardliners call for a demonstration of overwhelming force to reassert authority. Yet even as plans were drafted, human intelligence services intercepted and analyzed them, identifying internal divisions, political constraints, and logistical bottlenecks, and feeding this information back into strategic planning, ensuring that any large-scale council action would be met with prepared counters, misdirection, and the exploitation of interspecies rivalries. And as the council hesitated, humanity continued to accelerate, integrating breakthroughs in material science, energy storage, and computational modeling into field-ready systems with speed that astonished even their own allies, shortening development cycles from decades to years, and sometimes months, through a culture that rewarded experimentation, tolerated failure, and rapidly disseminated successful innovations across both military and civilian sectors. And this cultural factor, more than any single technology, became the true engine of human ascendancy, allowing them to evolve doctrine and capability in lockstep with the changing strategic environment, while more rigid civilizations remained bound to established procedures and slow institutional learning. And as this divergence widened, the balance of power began to shift in ways that raw fleet counts could not capture, with humanity gaining an edge in initiative, adaptability, and strategic foresight that translated into control of the tempo of events. And by the time the Council finally moved to authorize a coordinated show of force near a cluster of human-aligned systems, the humans were already aware, already positioned, and already planning not merely to counter the move, but to turn it into a demonstration that would irrevocably alter how the galaxy perceived them, setting the stage for a confrontation in which ingenuity, preparation, and the exploitation of long-held assumptions would converge, forcing the Galactic Council to confront the full consequence of having misjudged the one species that refused to think, fight, and evolve by the rules that had governed interstellar power for millennia. The Council's decision to finally authorize a unified demonstration of force marked a turning point, not because of the strength it represented, but because of the assumptions that underpinned it, assumptions rooted in centuries of uncontested dominance and a belief that overwhelming mass and ancient doctrine could still impose order on a galaxy that had quietly outgrown them. And as the fleets of the Aurelian, Drask, KOYDH, and 3 other major powers began to assemble in the Carthos corridor, their movements tracked by layers of sensors and heralded by diplomatic communiques intended to project unity and resolve, human intelligence networks observed every phase of the mobilization with calm precision, mapping deployment patterns, identifying command hierarchies, and analyzing the political compromises that had shaped the final operational plan. And what they saw confirmed their expectations. That the Council's show of force was constrained by internal rivalries, by the need to satisfy multiple doctrines, and by a strategic culture that valued visible strength over adaptive flexibility. And within human command, Admiral Hayden and his staff recognized that this was not merely a military maneuver, but a psychological one, intended to reassert the Council's authority and remind younger civilizations of the established order, and so they prepare a response that would not seek a direct clash of numbers, but a demonstration control of the ability to shape events so completely that even the largest fleets would find themselves reacting rather than commanding. And as the Council Armada advanced toward the outer ring of human-aligned systems, human task forces dispersed, adopting formations that appeared scattered and vulnerable, their signatures deliberately exaggerated to suggest incomplete coordination and limited readiness. And this illusion, carefully crafted through controlled emissions and selective leaks of outdated tactical data, reinforced the Council's belief that humanity would either withdraw or attempt a desperate, conventional defense. And yet beneath the surface, a far more intricate operation was unfolding, with human electronic warfare units positioning themselves to penetrate and overload the communication backbones linking the Council fleets, while autonomous sensor platforms seeded the region with false targets and shifting navigational references, subtly altering the perceived geometry of space for alien guidance systems. And at the same time, human logistics nodes in nearby systems surge into full activity, not to mass supplies for a prolonged battle, but to enable rapid, high-tempo maneuvers that would unfold in tightly choreographed phases, each designed to create confusion, isolate elements of the Armada, and expose the vulnerabilities inherent in its multi-species composition. And when the first contact finally occurred, it was not the thunderous exchange of fire the Council had anticipated, but a series of cascading anomalies, navigation errors, delayed orders, and sensor ghosting that rippled to the alien formations, causing escort squadrons to drift out of position, command ships to lose synchronization with their screens, and entire wings to receive contradictory instructions. And as commanders struggled to restore order, human units struck with surgical precision, not aiming to annihilate, but to demonstrate reach and timing, disabling key relay vessels, severing data links, and then withdrawing before concentrated retaliation could be organized, leaving behind a growing sense of unease that spread through the Armada, for it became clear that the humans were not merely present, but everywhere at once, seeing more than they should, moving faster than expected, and shaping the flow of information in ways that no traditional countermeasure could immediately address. And within minutes, the Council's carefully planned formation had lost its cohesion, each contingent reacting to local conditions without reliable awareness of the broader picture, a fragmentation the human strategists had predicted and engineered. And as this fragmentation deepened, human forces escalated the demonstration, revealing advanced maneuvering capabilities that allowed small groups of ships to converge, strike, and disperse along vectors that exploited blind zones and alien sensor coverage. Their movements synchronized to a degree that suggested a level of command integration and predictive, modeling far beyond what the Council had believed possible for a civilization of humanity's age. And the psychological impact of this display was profound, for it challenged not only the Council's assessment of human technology, but its understanding of human strategic culture, showing a willingness to rely on decentralized initiative guided by shared situational awareness, rather than rigid adherence to pre-planned sequences. And this flexibility, combined with precise execution, created an operational tempo that the Council Armada could not match, forcing its commanders into a reactive posture from which they struggled to recover. And as reports of localized setbacks and unexplained losses filtered back to Virilia, the tone of the council debate shifted from confidence to concern, and then to disbelief, as it became apparent that the demonstration of force had instead become a demonstration of vulnerability, exposing how dependent the elder civilizations had become on predictable patterns and uncontested information dominance. And within human ranks, the operation was assessed in real time, AI systems correlating outcomes with projections, refining models, and confirming that the Council's response thresholds, decision delays, and coordination challenges aligned closely with prior estimates, validating the core premise of human strategy, that the greatest weakness of long-dominant powers lay not in their hardware, but in their institutional inertia and over-reliance on established doctrine. And as the Council Armada finally withdrew to regroup, officially framing the encounter as a limited probe rather than a setback, Human Command understood that a line had been crossed, that the galaxy had now seen, however briefly, that humanity could contest the initiative even against a coalition of ancient powers, and that this realization, once it took root, would alter calculations across countless systems, setting the stage for a broader reckoning in which ingenuity, adaptability, and the willingness to challenge assumptions would prove more decisive than the accumulated might of millennia. And as preparations began for the next phase, one that would move beyond demonstration to the redefinition of strategic norms, it was clear that the Galactic Council's misjudgment of human ingenuity was no longer an abstract error, but a tangible factor reshaping the balance of power, with consequences that would soon extend far beyond the Carthos corridor and into the very foundations of interstellar order. The withdrawal of the Council Armada from the Carthos corridor did not bring relief to its commanders or clarity to its strategists, but rather a deep and growing unease, because what they had encountered was not a conventional opponent whose strength could be measured in hull counts and energy output, but a system of warfare built around anticipation, misdirection, and the seamless fusion of human intuition with machine speed analysis. And as after-action reports circulated through alien command networks, a disturbing pattern emerged, one that showed human forces consistently acting on information that should not yet have been available, maneuvering into positions that countered Council movements before those movements had fully unfolded, and exploiting transient vulnerabilities that existed only for seconds, yet were struck with perfect timing. And this pattern led some analysts to speculate, in private and with growing alarm, that humanity had achieved a level of predictive warfare, not through precognition, but through the relentless integration of data, psychology, and adaptive modeling, allowing them to forecast decision trees and act on the most probable outcomes before they became visible. And within the human strategic core, this capability was a product of years of disciplined experimentation, of exercises that pitted human planners against increasingly complex simulations, of AI systems trained not only on historical battles but on the cognitive biases of alien command cultures, and of a doctrine that encouraged subordinate commanders to exploit fleeting opportunities rather than wait for perfect information. And this doctrine now bore fruit, as human task groups operated with a confidence born of shared situational awareness and trust in both their own judgment and the analytical frameworks that supported it. And as the Council struggled to reconcile its experience with its expectations, human operations expanded in scope, shifting from localized demonstrations to a coordinated campaign of influence that targeted the economic, political, and informational arteries of the interstellar order, with trade flows subtly redirected, insurance rates for shipping through Council-controlled corridors rising due to perceived instability, and neutral systems increasingly seeking human mediation and protection, not because they feared immediate conquest, but because they recognized competence and reliability in a galaxy suddenly made uncertain. And this shift in perception was perhaps the most damaging blow to the Council's authority, for it eroded the assumption that stability flowed naturally from ancient power, replacing it with the idea that adaptability and problem-solving capacity were now the true measures of leadership. And as this idea spread, the Council's internal cohesion weakened, with member species questioning whether collective doctrine still served their interests or whether bilateral arrangements with humanity might offer greater security and flexibility. And in response to this fracturing, hardline factions within the Council pressed for decisive action, arguing that only a clear, overwhelming defeat of human forces could restore deterrence and confidence. Yet even as such plans were debated, human intelligence services mapped the political landscape, identify which delegates were most resistant to change, which were most fearful of instability, and which were quietly open to new alignments. And these insights informed a parallel diplomatic effort, one that presented humanity not as a challenger seeking to overthrow the existing order, but as a partner capable of strengthening it through innovation, transparency, and shared security, a message carefully calibrated to resonate with species weary of stagnation and bureaucratic paralysis. And while this narrative gained traction, human military planners prepared for the possibility that persuasion would fail, refining contingency plans that account for the full mobilization of Council fleets, the activation of ancient defense networks, and the deployment of weapon systems whose destructive potential had not been tested in centuries. And these preparations, though extensive, were not focused on matching the Council blow for blow, but on shaping the battle space in advance, on degrading coordination, isolating key nodes, and forcing any confrontation to unfold on terms that favored speed, precision, and adaptability over sheer mass. And to this end, human research units accelerated work on next-generation propulsion and energy systems, achieving incremental but critical gains in maneuverability and endurance, while cyber and electronic warfare teams developed tools capable of penetrating even the most heavily layered alien command architectures, not through brute force decryption, but by exploiting protocol assumptions and legacy design features that no longer match the realities of a rapidly evolving technological environment. And as these capabilities matured, they were integrated into a doctrine that emphasized the convergence of effects, where kinetic, informational, economic, and psychological actions were coordinated to produce outcomes greater than the sum of their parts, a holistic approach that contrasted sharply with the Council's tendency to compartmentalize and sequence operations. And this doctrinal divergence further widened the gap between the two sides, making it increasingly difficult for Council planners to anticipate how and where human actions would manifest. And within this widening gap, humanity found room to maneuver, to experiment, and consolidate its position, building resilience through redundancy, dispersal, and the cultivation of a strategic culture that valued learning as much as victory. And as the galaxy watched the Council grapple with uncertainty, the image of humanity evolved from that of a troublesome newcomer to that of a catalyst for change, a civilization whose ingenuity challenged entrenched assumptions and whose methods hinted at a future in which power would be defined less by age and accumulation and more by the ability to adapt, integrate, and act decisively in the face of complexity. And it was this shift in perception, as much as any fleet engagement, that signaled the approaching climax, for it meant that when the next confrontation came, it would not be merely a test of weapons, but a contest between two fundamentally different ways of understanding and exercising power in a galaxy that was no longer willing to be governed by the certainties of the past. By the time the Council finally committed to what it believed would be a decisive operation, the balance had already shifted in ways no amount of ancient firepower could easily reverse, because the humans had not merely prepared for a battle, they had prepared the entire strategic environment in which that battle would occur, shaping perceptions, alliances, information flows, and technological trajectories, so that every possible outcome favored their long-term position. And as the massive coalition fleets began their slow, deliberate advance toward the Helios cluster, confident that overwhelming numbers and centuries of doctrine would finally impose order, Human Command activated a multi-layered plan that unfolded across physical space and the cognitive space of their adversaries simultaneously, with forward sensor webs feeding continuous data into adaptive command systems, predicting formation changes, identifying stress points in coalition cohesion, and flagging moments when political compromise had produced tactical weakness, and at the same time, subtle disruptions spread to the coalition's logistical networks, not catastrophic enough to be immediately obvious, but sufficient to introduce delays, force rerouting, and create small mismatches in timing that cascaded into larger coordination problems. And as these friction points accumulated, human task groups maneuvered into positions that allowed them to exploit them with precision, appearing at the edges of alien formations, striking at vulnerable support elements, and withdrawing before concentrated response could be brought to bear, all while maintaining the illusion that their forces were far fewer and more scattered than they truly were. And this illusion, reinforced by carefully curated electronic signatures and controlled leaks, encouraged coalition commanders to press forward, believing they were gradually cornering an opponent who could be forced into a decisive engagement. unaware that every step deeper into the prepared battle space increased their exposure to layered human capabilities. And when the first major clashes finally erupted, they did not resemble the grand fleet actions of Council War doctrine, but a series of rapid, localized confrontations in which human units exploited superior situational awareness and coordination to isolate segments of the coalition, overwhelm them briefly, and then fade back into the operational fog, leaving behind confusion, disrupted command chains, and a growing sense that the initiative had slipped irretrievably from alien hands. And as the coalition attempted to adapt, issuing new orders and revising plans, they found that their communications were increasingly unreliable, their sense of picture fragmented, and their ability to synchronize across species and doctrines degraded, while human forces, operating on shared data and flexible mission-type orders, continue to act with coherence and speed, concentrating effects, without the need for centralized micromanagement. And this contrast in operational culture became stark, revealing that the Council's strength in numbers was offset by vulnerability and adaptability, while humanity's relative material inferiority was compensated by a capacity to learn and adjust in real time. And as the engagements multiplied, this dynamic produced a compounding advantage, with each human success generating data that further refined predictive models and tactical algorithms, while each coalition setback eroded confidence and cohesion. And within the council chambers on Berelia, the reports arriving from the front forced a painful reckoning, as delegates who had once dismissed humanity as naive and technically unsophisticated now confronted evidence of a strategic system that rivaled, and in some respects surpassed their own, not in raw power, but in integration, speed, and creativity. And the debates that followed were no longer about whether humans could be contained, but about how the interstellar order itself would have to change to accommodate a civilization that had demonstrated the ability to contest, and in key domains to dominate, the processes by which power was exercised. And as this realization spread, it became clear that even a tactical victory against human forces, should one be achieved, would not restore the old equilibrium, because the underlying factors that had enabled humanity's rise, their culture of innovation, their willingness to challenge assumptions, and their integration of diverse disciplines into a unified strategic approach, would continue to generate new capabilities and new methods. And this understanding cast a long shadow over the coalition's remaining options, for it suggested that the conflict was no longer about a single campaign or sector, but about the emergence of a new paradigm in which ingenuity, adaptability, and the ability to operate effectively in complexity would define leadership. And as the human fleets maintained pressure, shaping the pace and character of the fighting, the Council's misjudgment of human ingenuity was revealed in its full scope, not as a single analytical error, but as a systemic failure to recognize that a young civilization unburdened by rigid tradition and driven by a relentless drive to learn and improve could evolve faster than ancient powers bound by their own history, setting the stage for a final phase in which the implications of this shift would be made unmistakably clear to the entire galaxy. The culmination came not in a single cataclysmic battle, but in a moment of undeniable clarity that spread through every command center, council chamber, and neutral observatory across known space, as the coalition fleets, stretched thin by weeks of reactive maneuvering and eroded by constant informational and logistical pressure, finally attempted to regroup for a coordinated counteroffensive, only to find that the strategic environment itself no longer belonged to them. Their communication networks compromised, their predictive models invalidated, their allies uncertain, and their operational tempo hopelessly outmatched by a human force that now moved with the confidence of complete situational mastery. And when the final coordinated human operation unfolded, it did so with precision that left no room for misinterpretation, as multiple task groups executed synchronized actions across several key sectors, not to annihilate, but to demonstrate absolute control, disabling major relay hubs, neutralizing defensive grids, isolating fleet concentrations, and then halting deliberately before inflicting irreversible destruction, a calculated restraint that carried a message more powerful than any barrage, that humanity could dismantle the Council's ability to project power, and chose not to, that it could dictate the terms of engagement, and chose instead to dictate the terms of coexistence. And as the data from these operations poured in, the remaining resistance within, the Council collapsed not in panic, but in a sober recognition that the assumptions underpinning their dominance had been rendered obsolete, that their centuries-old models of strategic superiority could not account for a civilization that learned faster than it could be analyzed, adapted faster than it could be countered, and integrated innovation across every layer of society with a speed and coherence that no ancient bureaucracy could match. And in the chambers of Aurelia, where humanity had once been discussed with thinly veiled disdain, the delegates now sat in silence as projections displayed the scope of what had been achieved, not through brute conquest, but through the systematic application of ingenuity, foresight, and coordinated action. And it became clear to all present that the galaxy had crossed a threshold, that the era in which age and accumulated power guaranteed authority was giving way to one in which adaptability and creative problem-solving defined true leadership. And in this new era, humanity stood not as a reckless upstart, but as a stabilizing force whose strength lay in understanding complexity and shaping it rather than denying it. And as formal communications were exchanged, acknowledging new security arrangements, revised spheres of influence, and the establishment of joint frameworks that reflected a more balanced distribution of power, the unspoken truth resonated through every word that the Galactic Council had not been defeated by superior numbers or ancient weapons, but by its own failure to recognize the potential of a species that thrived on challenge and uncertainty. And for humanity, the outcome was both a validation and a warning. A validation that their ingenuity and resilience could carry them on to the highest stage of interstellar affairs, and a warning that such standing carried responsibility for the same qualities that had allowed them to rise could, if misused, destabilize the very order they now helped to reshape. And so, as the final operation concluded and fleets returned to their stations, the human commanders and diplomats alike understood that the true victory was not in forcing the Council to yield, but in compelling it to learn, to adapt, and to accept that the galaxy was no longer a static hierarchy, but a dynamic system in which no civilization, however ancient, could afford to underestimate another. And across the stars, the lesson spread, carried in analysis reports, strategic briefings, and quiet conversations among officers and leaders, that humanity, once dismissed as inexperienced and technologically immature, had demonstrated a form of power rooted not in tradition, but in relentless innovation, cooperation, and the courage to challenge established thought, and in doing so, had forever altered the balance of the galaxy, proving that the greatest mistake the Galactic Council had ever made was not a flawed deployment or a delayed decision, but the simple, fatal assumption that human ingenuity had limits they could safely ignore.